Hello, everybody. First thing I just want to remind you is because there are people on Zoom, when you're speaking, remember to use the microphone so they can hear it as well. The first thing we need to do is elect a vice chair for the remainder of the current year. I suspect we may only have, do we have one more meeting after this year? I think we do. Yeah. So it's for this meeting and the next one. Any people like to nominate themselves? I tried to get Chris to nominate himself.
I'm happy to nominate myself.
Okay, I second him. Do I have any other nominations? Okay, well done, congratulations, so high post. Apologies, are there any, please, Lucy?
None, no. Councillor Latif may be late, but none have received.
Okay, and I did say to Amir Latif that if he's coming in after finishing being a doctor out in Witney, and if he gets delayed, I've said it's fine if he tries to log on online. Any declarations of interest? No? Thanks very much. One. Okay, Anna.
Oh, a very minor one, which is I am on Littlemore Parish Council, which is mentioned in one of these items.
Okay.
I'm mostly playing anyway as well, as a parish councillor, Rising as Sandhurst.
I'm the same. I'm the parish council of Littlemore, and they mentioned in the reports. Sorry.
Are either of us on a parish council?
I'm not sorry.
No, we've missed out, so we're not on a parish council. We don't live in a parish. Okay, thanks very much. So I'm going to invite Bill online. I assume we've all had a chance to go through his report. So I'm going to invite you to introduce it, Bill, fairly briefly. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so this is the normal quarterly report for risk management. There's a slight difference this time in that the corporate risk register is currently in the process of being updated by senior officers. So it kind of seemed a bit silly to put the comparison with previous periods because it would have been everything had kind of dropped off and the new ones had come on. So that's a slight difference from previous. But attached at the appendix is a summary of the current thinking on the corporate risk register. Details of the red risks are within the report as normal. No change in the kind of presentation of the service risk registers. Again, as normal, the red risks are they're identified in the body of the report at paragraph 9. So there's one new red risk, and that's the first one on the list, which I put as first because then it's more easily identifiable. I think that's really all I need to say. Thanks, Chair, if I pass it back to the committee.
Thank you very much. That was nice and brief. I have one or two questions or comments, but first, does the committee have any questions on the assessment? Maybe we start with the corporate risks. Any comments on the corporate risk, Tiago?
Okay. About the risk assessments, about the final service, about the employees and manager to deliver service due to increased workloads.
Sorry, that's on the service risk, I think.
Yeah.
First, let's talk.
Okay,
the first
sorry.
section is corporate risk. Are there any questions about that? If not, I had just one. For some reason, the two risks related to climate change have been separated out. And I think it just makes sense to combine them. I didn't understand why they'd been split in two. They both relate to climate change. That was just, I guess, a kind of simplification suggestion, but it seemed odd to distinguish in that way. That was a mere.
Yeah, Chair. I think originally when senior managers were considering this, they were combined, but then kind of when that was further analysed, it was actually felt that there's a difference between the actual emergency, which we have limited kind of influence over, and the actual adaptation that we make kind of with our properties, etc. And we're dealing with any kind of outcomes of climate change. So it was felt that they were two kind of separate risks, really, rather than, although admittedly both relating to climate change.
Okay, I'm sorry, Ros.
Sorry for not putting my microphone on before. I think I hadn't done that. I just want to be a bit clear, if I could, Chair. Under the corporate risk register on paragraph 7, it mentions that it's attached at Appendix A. I don't appear to have Appendix A. I have Appendix 1. Is that the one that I should be looking at, Chair? I'm looking for your guidance.
I don't have a copy in front of me or a laptop, so
Yeah.
I'm asking Bill.
Apologies, I've obviously messed up the referencing there.
Thank you, Chair. So that is Appendix A. So these risks numbered from 1 to 10, with one which is split in half, as you've mentioned already, 7A and 7B. We have quite a few, obviously, red here, and amber, in fact, actually, which I think we do need to take quite serious note of. Are we sort of, I guess we're noting comments and so forth. I think we should note that we have an increased number of red, and its gross impact and probability, which are red. I just wondered, as we have some officers here, including Nigel Kennedy, whether he would like to comment on the consequence of this, but also the mitigation that we're going to be seeing over the next few weeks to bring these red down to amber at least, if not green.
Wrong one. Okay, it's okay. Yeah, thanks for that, actually. This is a culmination of work that was undertaken by the corporate management team and a number of heads of service. So a lot of these risks are allocated to individuals, basically, to be accountable for, actually. In terms of the bringing these down from red, I mean, this was an assessment at a point in time, which is shortly before Christmas, actually. I think a lot of them, and certainly a lot of them are in my area, basically remain that. I mean, in terms of financial stability, clearly, if we take recommendations perhaps that I've made and will go to Cabinet shortly, then hopefully financial stability will improve a little, actually. That is yet to be decided, actually. But things around workforce sustainability, again, is a problem across the authority. We might come on to that one again, specifically for financial services in a minute, actually, but that remains a problem across the authority. I think climate change and the recent flooding, basically, obviously, within Oxford has highlighted that, I suspect. And again, the factors that we've had to put in place to stem the flood position is ongoing, sort of thing. I can't see that coming down anytime soon, and certainly increased demand for services. I mean, we're seeing unprecedented demand, especially in respect of temporary accommodation. And it is a real concern, basically, certainly from my point of view, from a financial position, and no doubt from the officers involved in dealing with that issue, actually. And again, I suspect that one may well be retained at high and red, basically, if only for that particular reason. There are lots of mitigations currently being put in place to try and reduce these, or if not reduce, to at least not have them escalating. And certainly I'm aware, in terms of the TA stuff that I've just mentioned, basically, we are working on a number of mitigation plans basically to increase supply, because the demand just seems to be going up and up and up. So do I expect these to come down anytime soon? Probably not a lot. Say financial stability might well come down to amber. I think it will always be amber, basically. But the other ones, I think they will remain high, but I'm confident in the work undertaken by CMT and heads of service that mitigations will be in place to at least try and mitigate or prevent the escalation, basically, of some of these areas.
Thank you. Yes, Ros?
So can I go on? Because it's just quite a bit. I'll probably have to take some of this outside the meeting, I think, actually, because it's quite a bit. Thank you, Nigel, for those. Mitigations, I've got a question mark next as to what actually mitigations they'll be taking, but I realise there's probably not the officer here to answer that question with particular reference that you've made to the demand for temporary accommodation. I'm taking that as probably from those that are homeless. Or those that need to move to better accommodation. That's the thing, right? But it does actually mention, I think, under Helen Bishop's area, that's the workforce sustainability. It does actually mention legal challenges. You know, that's the consequence of happening, and union disputes as well. That's not good to hear at all, actually, if we're having that sort of effect on our staff as such. And Helen's not here, is she? Oh, she is. Oh, right. Okay. Well,
Helen
perhaps I can
is
ask the same
online,
question.
yes.
Of Helen, in fact, actually, what's the sort of mitigation for that, for the red audit on this?
Helen, can you come in, please?
Sorry, Chair, I've had problems joining, so I've only just joined. I'm on my a different device, so you'll need to explain what you're talking about. Sorry.
Sorry, Helen. Welcome.
I'm sorry, Councillor
Happy New
Smith.
Year to
I've only
you.
just joined. I'm having technical issues, and
Yeah.
I've just
I
heard
think-
my name.
Oh dear. I think technical issues is actually part of the problem actually as well. One of the risks that
Okay,
we've got. So there we
sorry,
go.
Councillor. You just need
We're
to.
going to be talking about. Yes, thank you. Right, thank you. Yes, it's actually the workforce stability is rated as a red risk.
On which report is this though, Ros?
This
Sorry.
we're only on agenda item 4, which is the risk register.
Right.
Okay, and we're seeing the workforce sustainability. God, I can't get my teeth around that word. Is showing us as a red rating on the risk, and I was just asking what the sort of mitigation plans are actually to bring that down to at least amber.
Sorry, I am completely unprepared. I didn't know that this was on here. Sorry. So could you, I'm really sorry. I'm struggling to find where you are on the agenda.
Could I suggest, Helen?
I mean, I'll happily pick it up offline. I'm sorry,
I was
James.
going to say,
I've just landed in the middle of this and I'm trying to find where you are.
So we're looking at the risk management. We're going through the corporate risk register, which Bill introduced, and then we're going to the service risk. What I'm going to suggest is maybe you can hear the questions such as those from Ros. I know Chris has put his hand up. Maybe he has a question. But what I am going to suggest is that you hear them and maybe send us a response.
Yes.
Via Lucy, who will share it with the.
Yeah, of course. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to get myself organised. That's no problem.
Did you catch the question then? Helen, you caught the question?
No, I didn't catch anything. I just arrived and I heard, and this is Helen Bishop, and I didn't understand the question. So if Lucy wants to send it me offline, I'll reply to Councillor Smith. Is that all right?
Thank you. That's what I thought.
Yeah, thanks.
Chris Jarvis, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just a question in the same area, and I'll be brief and happy to take it offline as well. But just on the workforce sustainability, I'm looking at Appendix A or 1, whatever we're referring to it as now. It refers to the consequence of this issue being poor morale, impact on well-being, increased workload, putting pressure on capacity, and then in the control and action list we've got in the same section, it suggests that having a smaller workforce is part of a solution to that. To me, a smaller workforce will surely exacerbate all those issues of increased workload, poor morale, impact on well-being, and so on. And I just wanted to query that.
Would you like to come back on that, Helen? Now, again, respond by email and we can all see it later.
Yeah, can I do that, please, James?
That's fine.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to suggest Anna.
Yeah, sorry, I have a very minor point on the exact same bit of the table, which is the workforce sustainability one. The first control action thing is council doing less to address staff capacity, which doesn't sound right. So, yeah, if that could be either, sort of amended or made slightly more clear, that'd be, good, thanks. I think actually in a general point, there's quite a lot of spelling mistakes in all of the control action bits actually in the whole table, but yeah, there probably is no spell checker in Excel or whatever.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, they're grammatical typos and things. Maybe someone could make a note if they have time to check before we get sent the papers. Okay, I think we've completed on corporate risk. Let's come to service risk. Do we have any queries from committee members? I have a couple. Okay, I've been invited to go first. Thank you very much. In one, which is really a topic we've already raised, which is more like a corporate risk, they mention financial services and employee workload. Clearly, this isn't solely an issue for that. So I think it should be handled under corporate risk rather than here. And the other point is about something that seems to me even more parochial. I mean, okay, financial services probably not parochial, but there's a whole question or red risk about community services and the Hinksey pool. And I really didn't understand why that, for the whole council, has been elevated to a red service risk. And I suggest it's treated elsewhere. But those were my two comments on that. But I see Ros and then Tiago had their hands up.
Right, okay. Yes, thank you. What I think is disappointing actually in this report is not to see a full list of all the risks actually. I thought as Audit and Governance Committee we would be seeing a full list of all the risks, and we're not. We're just seeing the red and amber. It would have been good to see what was green as well too, and perhaps had a chance to complement those areas of service that are doing well. And are not seen as a risk to the council as such. I think it'd be good in the future if we could see that, Chair, the full risk register, not just the top part.
Could I say, I think that we agreed to have a reduced list.
Did
but
you?
If we could have as an appendix, then maybe Bill could note in future, we could have the full list as an appendix, so it doesn't fill up the main report.
Yeah, it certainly would have been good to see more of the amber ones. We're just seeing the red ones actually, because there are a very large number of amber ones which could go either way. I'm sure. It's good to see that we've got two less actually from the amber, but we obviously got the red ones going up. I did too actually wondered why the Hinksey heated outdoor pool cover was a risk there, but I guess it is quite a popular thing, quite a sort of jewel in the crown of the city council. So perhaps that's reason for seeing it there. In fact, actually, Chair, it could be reputation, as it says, negative publicity, and I'm sure the council doesn't want to have that. Again, it mentions employee ability to deliver services due to increased workloads and volume of emails, which also together with the online meetings and excessive pressure on demands and staff and managers as well. We haven't really sort of seen a mitigation for that at all for the service. We've seen it on the corporate, but there's no real mitigation at all on any of these service risks that have been identified here as red. And I think it would be good to see something back, Chair, perhaps at the next meeting. We could have a list of what the mitigations are to overcome some of these. It's mentioned briefly, but it's not good. I feel it's an incomplete report, Chair. That's what I would say.
Nigel, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I think it's the balance between providing sufficient information and perhaps going over the top sort of thing, and perhaps we haven't quite struck that balance actually. I can only speak for the financial services risk. I mean, we're probably at unprecedented sort of levels. We've got at least 5 senior managers who are on long-term sick at the moment. Actually,
Okay.
I've got 2 which have become vacant very recently. I've got temps basically I'm covering for. So in terms of mitigations. and the workloads on finance at the moment, which this committee will be aware of in terms of budget setting, in terms of final accounts, are significant. I specifically mentioned procurement as well. Again, we're seeing quite a number of challenges. I would add unsuccessful challenges against procurement processes actually. Just the workloads are really heavy. Say in terms of mitigations, I've brought in where possible sort of temps, and temps are hard to get hold of as well. We are having to prioritise workloads basically, and just chunk through work as best we can actually. But it's certainly difficult, and that's why it's mentioned on there. I think there are a number of services basically that are alluding to this particular problem. Planning's another one sort of thing, and I know property is another one as well. And that's why you will see the workforce sustainability issue at a corporate level, because that's all packaged up. And I think Helen, in her role as head of business improvement, is responsible for sort of coordination of all that. But at service base, those are the problems, and certainly financial services that I can speak about.
Actually, may I suggest, because this is a generic problem we've had, and the budget process doesn't make it any easier, could we request a paper from Helen for the next meeting to describe how you're trying as best you can to address this problem?
Yeah, of course, certainly.
Other questions on?
Of course, my question is also about the same issue, about mitigating issues, because we said here in a financial service, difficult for employees and managers to deliver service, the pressure of demand of emails and online meetings. What I want to ask is if they have any plans, for example, to have an intelligent artificial to respond some emails, or other is if the council make any assessment to see what the unvalue online meetings we can reduce, because it's sometimes it's happened, This is also these two questions and one suggestion, we can say that.
Did you want to respond, Nigel?
Yeah, again, I can speak from my experience in terms of financial services. Certainly in the revenues and benefits field, actually, we are doing significant work in the area of robotic process automation. We have automated at least 90% of the information we receive from DWP, to working pensions, around benefits. That's allowed us to sort of make efficiencies within that area in terms of workforce. And it has also improved our response times in terms of processing housing benefit claims and change of circumstances. So we do make quite significant use of that to try and relieve the pressures. And I know Helen as well is making similar sort of inroads in terms of ICT and other areas of the business as well, actually. But we try as much as we try and automate as much as we can.
Thank you. Any other questions from committee members on service risk? So we thank you very much, Bill, for the report. I think at this point, do we just note? Yeah. Yeah, we note it, and thanks very much. Next, I'm assuming that Adrian is the mystery. Oh, it's not Adrian, because it's a magic number, 2002349. Hello. Are you going to give, please, a verbal introduction to where we are on the external audit? Over to you.
I am. Thank you, Chairman. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Maria Grindley. I'm the audit partner with Ernst & Young. So a couple of updates. So firstly, on the 2021-22 financial statements, you'll have just heard Nigel Kennedy talking about some of the challenges that the finance team are facing currently. We took a decision back in November to sit down with Bill and Nigel and pull together all of the queries we had that were outstanding with the council, but then to step back and give the council time to respond to those queries, because clearly there's an awful lot going on. The teams are very stretched. They were trying very hard to respond to audit queries, but it was very much on top of an already very busy day job. So it was very hard for the finance team to get responses back to us across all our queries. So we gave a complete list, which we sent over, and we've stepped back from the audit at this point in order to give finance time to respond to all of those queries. I understand from an update call today between Adrian and Bill that a lot of that information is now back with Bill and the finance team from across the council, but there's a check going on just to make sure that we will have everything. And I think Bill and Adrian are planning to meet next week to go through progress with that. So it was really just a sensible step away from the audit to give your team a bit of headspace and time to deal with the queries. So there hasn't been any progress from our perspective as a result of that, but we will update you at next committee. With regards to the 22-23 financial statements, we aren't planning to start those financial statements at this point. We are waiting to see what the legislative changes might be that the government might make to help clear the backlog of financial statements across the public sector. So we're waiting to see what that legislation looks like. In the meantime, the work that we are doing is the work that we know will need to be done, which is the value for money aspect of our work up until March 23, so 22-23. And the reason for doing that is it means that if there is a reset, that we can start again in 23-24 and get councils back on track. That value for money work then won't hold anything up. So the second piece that the council has from the point of view of queries are the queries that we need to start and complete the value for money work to the end of 22-23, so to the end of March 23. So they're the two pieces of work where we have queries out with the council, and that's basically the progress to date. Happy to take any questions.
I just ask what I'm sure we all are interested to know. When do you, Bill, Nigel, anyone else relevant, expect at least the 21-22 final accounts to be ready?
Difficult question to answer, Chair, because it does rely on the time that it takes also for the auditors to review our responses. We are hoping to get it over the line within the next few months, but as I say, it does depend on what kind of comes out from the results of the queries, etc. And if I could just add to what Maria was saying, that yeah, there's a meeting set up between myself and Adrian next week to look at the 21-2 and also the value for money opinion. So we are working on it, and I think the pause was very welcome by my team, and also it was sensible from the auditor's perspective, because there's no point in them hanging around and waiting for something when we're struggling to deliver it to them and it coming in dribs and drabs. So I think it's a far better way of progressing this is that we'll get all of their answers to the auditors, and then they can actually come back in and review it all. But as I say, I'm having a discussion with Adrian Barmer next week about what the sort of time frame is going to be for that, Chair.
Thanks. So does that mean that it's possible we won't have the final 21-22 accounts until we're in the 24-25 financial year?
That is always possible. I would not like to be in that position, so we want to not be in that position, but it is possible. I mean, I can't kind of I can't say what what the auditor's view and what the auditor's opinion will be, and I don't think Maria can at the moment without seeing what's presented to them.
Yeah, I think if I may, Chairman, through you, I think until we receive all the responses back to queries, I can't answer that question, because obviously, as I say, we'd got to the point where we weren't getting the responses we needed, so we pulled away. But obviously, if Bill and the team are able to give us clean responses to all those queries, then, you know, from the point of view of resources, I'll put resources in as soon as we've got the responses from the council. That's not a problem from our side. But it will depend on what we get back from the council. And as soon as we get that, we will do everything we can to help you get them over the line. But we had to recognise, obviously, the pressures that your teams were under, and the fact that there was no point us hanging around waiting for bits to come through in dribs and drabs, as Bill says. It was more sensible to give you the space to turn those queries around.
Thank you. Ros, you're about to.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a capacity matter. And thank you, Marie. Happy New Year to you.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you too.
It's obviously a capacity matter, but I was quite sort of shocked to hear Bill say a few months before we have a sign off on the 21-22 audit as such. That's quite some time off. I would have hoped it would have been weeks. And Maria has said that as soon as the questions are answered from the City Council officers, that they have got the resources, which is good to hear, Maria, to finalise the accounts, and so we can have those signed off. Can I just I want to make something clear, because I was trying to listen very carefully to what you were saying. You're talking about the value for money for the 22-23 financial statements. Are you saying that work has actually started already for the City Council for 22 value for money?
Yes, apologies, Councillor Smith. Yes, we have sent our queries across for that. We have resources ready to do the work, so we're waiting just for the responses on that. But we certainly started to pull together everything we have, and that's purely because we know that we're going to need to do that as part of getting you back on track. So we thought, whilst we have the resource, let's at least try and get that moving. There is a certain amount of information we already have on our files for the value for money work from previous years, things like your budgeting, financial management processes, those sorts of things that feed into that value for money conclusion, and commentary, we already have. So it made sense for us to start trying to get that work done whilst we had the resources. But clearly we have got some gaps in that, so we have got queries out to Bill to get that completed.
Any other questions for Maria from the committee? Well, thank you very much. You'll gather we're as keen, possibly as you are, to get this over the line for past years. I could ask Ros how this compares with how the county is doing in its audit. How is that? Is that more up to date?
I expect Maria will give a bit better update.
I'm happy to, if that's okay. So I have to be careful what I say, because clearly
for this council, though,
it's
not really something this council committee should be looking at, I don't think.
I can say, because it's publicly known from the committee minutes. I guess I can say, Councillor Ross, that the county council's audit is pretty much complete, and we are very much looking to sign. So they have managed to turn the queries round.
Thanks. No, I just wondered how we compare.
I didn't want to brag, and that's why I didn't think it was something that this should be really discussed at the City Council meeting.
Okay, thanks. Well, thanks very much, Maria, and Godspeed, as they say.
Thank you.
And same for Bill, and thanks very much for presenting your work. Okay, let's proceed now on to, well, Ryan's going to introduce the agenda item 6, the setting of the tax base. Would you like to say a few words of introduction, Ryan?
Thank you, Chair. The council tax base is very similar to most previous years, and it's to agree the recommendation to set the council tax base for the 24-25 financial year at 46,234.9, which can be seen in the report itself as well. It's an increase from the 23-24 of about 0.87%, just under 1%. And the tables within the report itself briefly explain the movements that have occurred in the year, as well as the breakdown for the individual parishes as well. These calculations then feed directly into the council tax setting for 24-25, which sets the Band D charge for the following year. That goes to full council in mid-February for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from the committee about this? I'll take Amir since he's just arrived.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for being late. I think I had submitted some apologies in advance. Ryan, thanks for presenting the paper. I wonder, I'm just a little bit unsure. You say that the rise in the tax base is 0.87%, roughly speaking, but obviously the council tax went up more significantly than that. So I'm just trying to understand why there's a difference between the rate at which the council tax might go up versus how the tax base might go up. Thank you.
Ryan, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you for the question. The council tax base itself is the number of different properties that receive a charge itself. So it's the council tax base is more about the total number of dwellings chargeable within the city boundary, whereas the council tax charge itself is the charge paid by each individual household. So the increase in year on year is generally due to do with new builds within the area, but there are other fluctuations as well based on the number of reliefs that are applicable.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Tiago, then Ros.
Hi. I remember last year I asked about the empty dealings from Oxford City Council. And I will make the same questions as last year. If we still have any empty dealings owner from Oxford City Council, if is yes, if you have any more than 1 year or more than 2 years, and the reason. The second question is we are here speaking about serving an empty dealing management order. I try to understand if we are raising any this year or not. And the second is, or the third, is when we said the number of new properties built, they said the estimate is 250, more 0.32%. We assume 50% of discounts. I would like to know if this is a conservative figures or not, and it's all.
Okay, Ryan, did you get those questions? Could you maybe respond now?
And if I can just come in on the empties, I think that'll have to be something that we'll bring back because that information we haven't actually got here. So potentially to a future meeting, if that's acceptable, Chair.
Well, that's very acceptable. Maybe I could say at this point, I'm not sure, you mentioned CPOs and EDMOs. I just wonder whether we've had any. I mean, I know CPOs have been for residential property really hard to get through, and it's costly and time consuming. I don't know how important these are, but maybe you could prepare a note about these two mechanisms to bring property back into use, and we could have it at our next meeting.
Yeah, I think we'll have to get colleagues in other departments to provide that information, but I'm sure we can manage that.
Then Tiago asked, are these conservative? This is for Ryan again. Are they conservative estimates when you make these?
Yes, to a certain extent, yes, they are. because we don't know when exactly within the financial year the new builds will become chargeable, because we don't know exactly when completion will occur, and we don't know exactly when residents will move in. So it's a conservative estimate based on those assumptions. We also build into the new builds potential for exemptions, CTR, council tax reduction scheme, single person discounts as well. So that's built into the figures as well.
Thank you. And then the other query, which was about the the voids for, I guess, Tiago, HRA, council housing property. Do you have, maybe you don't, is it possible to have information on that?
Yes, that will be part of the next report, I'm afraid, because that will be information that we'll have to gather from other colleagues within the council. Thank
you very much, Ros.
Thank you, Ryan, for your report. It always makes quite interesting reading, but perhaps I'm nerdy like that. The long-term empty premium that you've mentioned on page 34 at the top there makes very interesting reading. You mentioned actually that the extension to the premium extra charge that we want to charge for homes that have been empty for longer than a year. And in fact, some of them I see for over 5 years and some for only excess of 10 years. It's been asked about the compulsory purchase order, but I just actually wondered how many, and I guess it's again a question for another officers, how many empty dwelling management orders have been placed, in fact, on any of these 153 dwellings that we've got empty for 2 years or more. I think it's very sad, given our housing demand and the high cost of housing in Oxford City, that we have so many empty properties, in fact, not just dwellings actually, but businesses that are empty as well too, including some of our own council buildings. Anyway, just to move on, thank you for the explanation to Amar for the change in the tax base here. He obviously calculated the two things. One is an increase in council tax, and one is actually an increase in the number of dwellings that we have. That it hasn't gone up that much is also a worry, because it means that we haven't got homes occupied and paying council tax. I think that's important to note as such. The second home premium as well, you've mentioned, Ryan, in your report. Are we getting the increased premium on that or not? Or DULAC still, we're still waiting on DULAC? I mean, it mentions a council tax information letter in 2024, which is now January. I just wondered if that had arrived yet, Ryan.
Nigel, I think, is going to respond.
Eager to get in there and answer.
Yeah, it's just a case that you may recall that in last year's budget process, council agreed to introduce the second homes premium, plus bring the long-term empty forward by a year, basically, off the back of expected legislation by the government, basically.
Yeah.
And many authorities, including ourselves, were trying to get ahead of the game. We were encouraged to do so. And so we approved that on the base, when and if we were allowed to by the legislation coming in. So we expected that to come in from the 1st of April 24. As late as, I'd say 3 weeks ago, the government had a meeting with officers, a number of officers from different local authorities, said that their legal guys had said that it was not legal, basically, for local authorities to introduce the charge on that basis. And whilst we haven't had official confirmation from DLUC, we wholly expect it. It's getting really late now, but the expectancy is that we will get that. So we will not be able to introduce that charge with effect from the 1st of April 24. We will effectively roll that over such that we can introduce it from the 1st of April 25. In terms of the budget, that means a one-off loss of income to the City Council in the region of 290,000. And that's the City Council element alone, actually. So it's a significant bit of a blow, but it's fair to say that DLUC have not been forthcoming with information on that basically. And there were a lot of annoyed authorities on that call a few weeks ago, I would say actually. But that's the position. So we are unable to, although the legislation has now been passed from October last year, we are unable to introduce those changes until 1st of April 25 at the earliest.
And if I could just add to that, just to assure the committee that because we had an officer who was attending that meeting, we actually got notification of it early enough, so we've changed the council tax base. So this doesn't include those extra premiums, and so therefore your council tax base isn't actually overstated in that respect.
Thank you.
Other questions from committee members? If not, maybe I can make one or two questions. I mean, CPOs and EDMOs will be, we'll get more information later. My impression when we raised this last year was that when you look at the long run empty homes, a disproportionate number, we were told, were linked to the universities and university colleges, university institutions. And they, in their wisdom, preferred to keep some of these large buildings. They're disproportionately, if you look at the percentages, I think they're disproportionately into the highest council tax bands. And in their wisdom, they want to keep them as they are, i.e. treated as empty homes. I just wonder, which is a question I doubt anyone here can answer, whether they shouldn't be probed for change of use by the planning service, whether if they are not being used for residential, maybe they should then be used and subject. I mean, I know as charities and all the rest, they would get big business rate reduction, but they still pay 20%. I just wonder whether they are legitimately classified as empty homes, or at least they should apply for change of use. That's one. The other is more of a comment. Everything is presented when you're doing the calculations for good reason in terms of a norm of council tax band D, number of dwellings. But if something is getting a discount because of the council tax reduction or whatever, then it's classified, if you like, as a fraction of a dwelling. Just for understanding the importance of the discounts in the overall scheme, I think it'd be good presentationally if you showed the total number of dwellings, and then once you've adjusted for discounts and premia, either way, just to see how that translates into the actual council tax collection, or expected collection. I assume that's possible because you must have the data in order to do these calculations. Is that fair comment? On my first one about the buildings being kept empty by university institutions, I'm not sure you can answer, but I would like it as a question to the planning team. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I can. So the answer to your first question is as you thought. We'll have to reevaluate with the planning department and see what we can get you as an answer for that. On the second point, yes, I take your comment. I can certainly attempt to put something in the table for next year, so it's a little bit clearer about the exact number of properties that are receiving these charges rather than band D equivalents.
I mean, I think it would just be good presentation to show the importance of discounts or premia in the overall, if you like, the tax base as we calculate it, but people, because the number of dwellings is not the same as what you have down here, which has been standardized.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I'll make sure that's there for next year. Thank you.
Thank you. And I should mention for the committee members, if they don't know, you, Ryan, are one of the star examples of someone who came as an apprentice, who's now moved up, and you're now, I'm trying to look what your title is now. What is your title?
Technical accountant. Yes.
Well, congratulations.
Yes, thank you. Yes, been here since I was an infant. Thank you.
So do we agree to the proposal for the council tax and all the parishes and all the rest for next year? Can I have nods, hands? Yes. I think it's unanimous. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Now you collect it. So we're now switching to the internal audit report, and I'm not sure how you're dividing it, Yasmin, you and Gurpreet, how are you going to do it?
Chair, Gurpreet's going to do the progress report and I'll go through the detail of each of the reports, if that's okay.
That's lovely. Hello,
Thank you.
Gurpreet. Hey.
Hi everyone. Hi, Chair. So I'll just mention a few things at first, and then Yasmin will be picking up the majority of the papers and the presentation. So in the pack, you'll see there are 3 individual reports which are summarised in the progress report that we're presenting. And Yasmin will go through the details on those, but obviously either of us can pick up questions on them. What I wanted to just flag for attention is obviously when you look at the table which sets out what we've done in the year, there are now 4 reviews which are finalised. There's a few others which are like recruitment and retention, which are nearing closure. But from my perspective, in terms of a head of internal audit opinion for future committees, whilst we're slightly behind, we've managed to make progress back. We expect to be in a substantial position at the next committee, and I think we've agreed for the one after is when we would then send our opinion, which I think is in line with previous years, which would be in July. You'll see from the overall summary of opinions that are there, it's looking quite positive. There's a number of substantials or part substantials and moderates as a minimum on the ones that we have, but some key areas like recruitment and retention. We've talked a lot about people already today on the risk conversation, which will be coming to this committee, health and safety, building control. So a number of those reviews coming to future meetings. The other couple of things I just wanted to pick up on as well was around, and it comes after the reports, but in our KPIs towards the back, it's really important for us to make sure we do get feedback on the end of each of our reports, so we can feed back to this committee any performance results that we're getting from officers. I don't think we've had any survey results yet for our 23-4 reports returned to us. So if it's a polite nudge, the more of those we can get, the more we can be transparent with you about the feedback we're getting from officers, and we'd welcome that so we can report those back, hopefully by the time we get to the opinion. So I'd welcome any encouragement of that. And the final bit I was just going to mention, which is not directly linked to in terms of internal audit service, but more so for your awareness. A number of members may be aware that the council set up an initiative of Match My Project in November, trying to get more social value out of suppliers. It's to make you aware that BDO are very actively engaged in Match My Project. We've done a couple of projects already and are continuing to do those as well with the Oxford Hub and Schools Plus, as well as with a local goalball club as well. And I'm pleased to say, although we are the only one on the list, we are top of the leadership board in terms of Match My Project as a supplier to the council. We'll continue to report that back to you so you're aware, but it's just to say from our perspective, it's part of our approach and mantra as a firm to make sure we are offering social value with organisations we work with, and also we'll continue to do that. Other than that, I'll pause there. So Yasmin will go through the individual reports now, but I'm here in the background if there are any questions that I can help to answer.
Could I just respond? And thanks very much, Gurpreet, for what you've already said. And I like your plug for your work. Actually, you'll be amused. We had the long discussion about the leisure services contract scrutiny yesterday, which will be an important item in this year's budget, well, going forward. And the whole question of how social value is included was an important part of the questioning yesterday's. In terms of the feedback, I'm sure it should be minuted, but I'm hoping, is it via you, Nigel, that the nudges should be given after we have the reports?
Yeah, I can do that, Chair, with the heads of service, actually, not a problem.
Thank you very much. So that was a good nudge. Okay, over to Yasmin now.
Thanks, Chair. I'll go through the empty properties report to start with. So this was a substantial on design and moderate on effectiveness. We focused on the controls the council has in place to bring empty properties back into use. In terms of good practice, so there's, I'll just touch on a few points. The council have a multi-agency approach that they're currently putting together to prevent empty properties. They're having initial discussions for developing a partnership with Oxford University and Aspire Housing with the aim to bring more properties back into use, which is good from our perspective. Council tax records held on the Civica system show that empty properties are clearly recorded under different classifications, and depending on what the circumstances are in relation to the vacancy, they're charged the premiums. So that was working well as well. Coming into the findings, I'll just touch on the media. Finding one was around the planning and regulatory services. They're working up their KPI targets on the number of empty properties they'll bring back into use. So the KPI target for 23-24 was 40 empty properties back into use, and this has increased by 12.5% to 45 properties for 24-25, and then 5 properties increment each subsequent year as well. Although the council is partnering up with Oxford University Aspire Housing to help achieve these targets, there should be a documented process on how the council plans to utilise resources in being able to achieve those targets. So that's a recommendation that we've made around that area. In terms of finding two, the issue and the enforcement of empty dwelling management orders is something the council are looking to use more of now as well. But it's important to have a more cross-departmental working group in place. So, for example, utilising the legal team in order to do that. So that's something that the council isn't currently doing as well as it should be, and we'll raise that as a finding and a recommendation area as well. I'll stop there for any questions on this particular report.
Anna, please.
Yeah, so just talking about these KPIs. So are there any other KPIs apart from just like the number of houses bought I could use, and historically have we met them?
I'll have to come back to you on that one in terms of the number of KPIs that we've had a look at, but this was the particular one that did cause a lot of, yeah, thank you.
Tiago.
I want to ask the same questions I did before, but in a different way. My understanding for this report is the empty dealing managed orders was not many from the City Council. This is my understanding. And the other thing I want on is to comment is about this report is the positive, the good work for preventing empty homes, as I see in the report. But I see for the long-term empty housings, I think this is one issue. The recommendation of the City Council. This is why my understanding was the empty dealing managed order was not too much. I'm right or not? Or my understanding is right?
Thanks, Councillor. In terms of, if I understand your question correctly, if I go into the area around, sorry, did you question the opinion of the report in terms of the amount of properties that are empty, but yet we've given a positive opinion?
The legal. My question is about. My understanding is the empty dealing managed order is the way legal the City Council can enforce. I can say that the unoccupied for more than 2 years housings, then can come back. Use it, and of course I cannot see the figures or other. My understanding of this report is really we are not very effective of the long-term empty housings. This is my understanding, but maybe I'm wrong.
In terms of the figures on the empty dwellings management order and how many have been issued, again, I'll have to come back on the figures. We can work with Brian and planning team to be able to do that and provide those figures to you. In terms of how effective it is at working, we did review council tax records and look at whether the council tax premiums are being charged on empty properties and the dwellings as well, where there's empty dwelling management orders that have been issued, and we found no issues in the sample that we tested at the time. Does that satisfy your?
Can we have some idea of the size of the sample?
We sample tested 15 records, and this was a medium risk rated area, and it was in accordance with the BDO methodology, and we were happy with that at the time of our review. Thanks.
I was just going to add, from a holistic kind of point of view, Oxford obviously, as with many regions, but Oxford obviously has its local challenges in terms of around empty properties. When you look at the national picture, long-term empty properties have gone up in the region of 10%, and in some places more than that. The Oxford figures, which I think are in the public domain as well, although they're slightly dated, move from long-term empty properties being at a figure of around 472 down, and it dropped down to 451. So that's slightly in contrast to what's happening nationally. So whilst the figures are always going to be higher than where Oxford would want them to be, actually what's happening here locally is slightly against what the national trend is, where it's going up. At least it's staying static or slightly going down in what is a very, very difficult area to manage and respond to. So I don't know if that goes to Tiago's councillor's question to some extent. Obviously the council do use legal powers where they can, and in the autumn statement last year, obviously there were new announcements around giving local authorities more power in the future around how to manage empty properties. And obviously secondary legislation and further information will provide details of what that may look like. Obviously for us, the key thing is, which was the first recommendation, is are the council sufficiently set up to make sure that they have the resourcing and the staffing input to make the most of all of the legislative powers that they will have to continue that trend and hopefully to see a further decrease in the future.
Thank you, Chair. I think what we also ought to note as the committee, in fact, actually, that the audit has recommended, in fact, actually, that we have better cross-department communication that would sort of enable better efficiencies to come out. And yeah. I think that's really quite clear in this report. It is a question of actually all the departments talking to each other. The question I would have, actually, Chair, and pose perhaps to those that are in charge of the administration here, is that do we have the legal capacity to actually undertake some of the quite difficult and complicated legal work with regard to empty homes, and actually putting these orders on them, whether they're an empty homes order or whether they're actually a CPO. I think very, very few CPOs have happened. As far as I'm aware, and you know, in my own area, there's been a house that has been, you know, derelict for 20 years, and it is really annoying because it's in a conservation area and could have been beautiful property for a family to live in, and to leave it derelict like that is when we have such a high demand for housing, particularly in areas of Oxford, like northeast Oxford, in the Barton, that area where we have a very high demand for housing, because we have 6 hospitals in that area who are finding very difficult to get hold of staff, as the local schools are as well. So it is important actually for this council to recognise, and it's good that we've seen it earlier on in our deliberations this evening, Chair, and again in the auditor's report too. Thank you.
I mean, I'm assuming that we're going to get a paper for next time about CPOs, about EDMO, and so that we can understand better. It's not just the numbers, but I think the practical difficulties of enforcing these. And to some extent, it's a cost benefit of how much you want to spend. As you know, with the property you're talking about, litigation galore has gone on around that one. Could I just ask, I have maybe a bit pedantic question, but you say the university working with the Spire. You know, the university isn't very centralized. The university is very diffuse. I believe, am I right, it's just 1 or 2 colleges which are involved with Aspire on this initiative. So I'm not quite sure how it's coordinated. You know, Aspire organizes housing for homeless people and people often with great difficulties. But I'm not sure whether it's a university-wide initiative. I'll be interested just to get a bit of, not necessarily from you, but later some clarification as to how it operates, because the colleges are big property owners, and one wonders whether this is a scheme that can be promoted more widely among the colleges, because I think centrally the university has rather limited powers on housing. Any other questions around this? I was going to say then maybe a more general point. I think that your reports are really about process, about how it works, rather than analysis of the detailed data. Is that fair?
That's a fair point, Chair. Yep.
Thank you very much. So if there are no more questions on this, you've noted some queries, maybe we can go to the next report.
Yep, so this is the accounts receivable report. This is a substantial on design and a moderate on effectiveness. So it's a cyclical review that we undertake to assess whether the controls in place for managing accounts receivable processes are adequate. So this includes the raising of invoices and receipting income within Aggresso, and then also the debt management arrangements that are in place as well, and whether these are working properly. I would like to point out that we reported a substantial moderate opinion on this review back in 2021 as well, and this continues to be the case for this year too, so nothing's dropped in opinion. If I focus on the medium priority findings, in terms of finding one, so a first reminder letter for overdue invoices that are sent 14 days from the invoice date is sent out by the Aggresso system. We couldn't determine from the Aggresso system whether an initial reminder letter was issued to customers for 3 out of our 15 samples reviewed, and there were no sufficient notes on the system to determine the progress of the debt either. In terms of finding two, management currently don't review the changes made to customer data changes such as address changes, bank detail changes. So we recommended this as part of our previous audit review in 2021 as well, and we recommended spot checks or quarterly checks to be undertaken. It was a low-level priority back then, but we've now raised it to a medium because that recommendation wasn't being undertaken. Currently, there's not a report that can be extracted from the system, but we have been assured that it's something that IT will work on, and a more fuller report will be produced going forward, and we can check that as part of our follow-up process as well. I'll pause there. I've just kind of done an overview of the medium priority findings rather than the lows.
Thank you very much. We've got Neil Markham here, who's down as one of the authors. I can't remember what you call it in the table, but you're responsible for that area. Could you respond? And in particular, the last point that Yasmin made about the spot and quarterly checks, whether they're being instituted now, and then is there something more fundamental to do with Aggresso? For me, it's a black box. I have no idea. So maybe you can respond to the comments of the internal audit.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, no problem. So I was actually quite pleased with how it came out, because this is the 4th time we've been audited since I've been with the team. And the first one, I think we were not very good, and it slowly got better. The fact that it stayed the same, I was actually quite pleased, given what we've gone through with COVID and everything else. So yeah, that was actually quite a good thing. In terms of reminders, it is a system limitation with Aggresso. When we move to cloud-based Aggresso, which is going to be happening next month, which is quite exciting, it will give us a lot more power in terms of what we can do. There'll be a function called Action Overview, which gives the officers the ability to more precisely say where an invoice is, and it will also record those backdated reminders that have gone out. At the moment, it only records the latest one, which is quite limited, and it's kind of always been like that. You can get the information out, but you have to really delve into the reports that were run on a daily basis. So it is quite a lot of work. It's not, at the front of the screen. So it's a bit of a challenge. In terms of customer changes, it is something that I've been aware of, and it's something that we have put on the back burner, and we have actually done it on purpose, just based on the amount of resource that we actually have and how we have to prioritise to try and, maximise the amount of income we're coming in. We judged it as a small risk, to be honest, because the amount of changes that are done by officers on a daily basis, for me to check those, it would almost become a full-time job. And so we didn't feel that was really prudent, given with the other areas the team's taken on as well. In March, for example, we took on housing benefit overpayments. So we're now managing both those services at the same time. So challenges on resources, the same for us as it is across the entire council. It is being stretched. But we are going to implement recommendations of BDO, and Alex, the officer who did it with us this time, he was actually really helpful in explaining to us how we could maybe modify that to make it work for us in a way that would be manageable in the future. So yeah, we are hopeful that that will be better next time.
Thank you very much. Does the committee have any questions for Neil or Yasmin?
I do.
Ross.
Sorry, Neil. Right. Yes, I remember the report from 2021. Yeah, I guess what I want to probe is when we have an unpaid invoice as such, and you haven't updated the information, and whether you actually link. So again, this is talking about talking to other departments with fraud and money laundering. When you have a business that has not paid their business tax, and there have been question marks, you know, so the invoices remain unpaid, is then that, does it ring a bell and then say, actually, I need to pass this on possibly to fraud, and it might be a fraudulent fraud being happening as such. I just wondered if that was happening, because that again is a loss of income. And just a minor point, from a personal point of view, when an invoice is sent out and it has to be paid by cheque at the post office because that charity has no other, or that organisation has no other way of paying it, please can you make sure that the barcode actually works? Because what then happens is you stand very embarrassed at the post office counter while you write out an envelope, you write the cheque out, you pop it in, you buy a stamp at over £1 it is and send it off to you. That is not efficient. It's not efficient for you for collection. And I think it's just a small thing, but apparently this is happening time and time again with charities in Oxford that are trying to pay their invoices to this council. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, in regard to the second point, yeah, that is a known issue. And so we are aware of that and we will work on that.
Thank you.
Can you just remind me of the first question?
Yeah, so it's to do with fraud and a change of address or a change of business owner or whatever. You know, if an invoice remains unpaid and you haven't updated their contact details or their address or whatever, does that ring a bell for the accounts receivable to say, actually, we better perhaps pass on a query to fraud, because it might be a question of fraud happening with a business actually doing an account with the council, and actually there's money laundering going on. That has happened to other councils in the country. So I'm just reporting something that's probably a known item, but I just want to know if you're talking to each other. That's all.
It certainly does happen. It's mainly on a kind of an officer basis. If that officer says something that they think is suspicious, then in the first instance, they'll come to me and then we will make that referral. We do have quite close links to Scott's team and fraud. And yeah, everything that goes on there.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
Other questions from committee? Could I just ask an obvious one? I know we're having Rocco later, but from IT, but you're talking of switching to a cloud-based Aggresso system. Is that something that you know is going to go smoothly? They don't always go smoothly.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we think it is going to go smoothly, primarily because we are not going to move to the cloud straight away. So we are being allowed to retain a desktop license for the team because there are a few parts of Aggresso that don't work smoothly in the cloud yet. One of them being subscription processing, for example, which of course is key for us and all of the commercial property revenue that we bring in. So that's going to give us actually a lot more time to then train the staff slowly and move across into the cloud at a more relaxed pace for our team, which we're quite happy about, if I'm honest. From the testing we've done in the cloud, it's vastly different. It's almost like using a new system completely. So it is going to be a challenge for the team, but we're basically just, you know, shouting about the advantages that it's going to give us in the long term. We'll be on a system straight out of the box instead of all the alterations that our historic system has. Things like action overview that I've already mentioned, there will be a lot more strings to our bow. So should be good.
Maybe having mentioned Rocco, and he did briefly put on his video, do you have any comment on the switch to Aggresso in the way that it's described as a rather gradual process?
Thank you, Chair. In all these things, one can never anticipate the unknowns. However, the team have been working really hard on this for a significant amount of time, so it hasn't been rushed. One would hope that the results are going to be really positive.
Thank you very much. Nigel's going to come in.
Well, just to say, actually, for my pains, I chaired the board for the Aggresso cloud upgrade, actually. So together with all the project managers report to me and teams, etc. So you know where to come to, basically, if it doesn't. I'd like to think it will go smoothly. We put as many checks and balances as we can into the system. We are doing extensive testing. As Rocco says, we're not rushing it, basically. And like I say, I'd hope to say that it will go smoothly. But as Rocco says, you can never be too certain. But you know where to come if it doesn't, basically. So I'll put my okay.
Thanks for being brave, Anna.
Yes, it is. I'm kind of surprised, given it's like Aggresso to Aggresso, that they don't just offer a migration service. But I guess like nothing's ever that simple, is it? I guess if you've got a sort of historic bit with bits bolted on, then it was yeah. I'm just genuinely quite surprised that that's not just like a service they offer. But
yeah, I mean, we are obviously working alongside Aggresso. We have an Aggresso consultant, basically from Unit 4. In addition to that, our project manager. I think one thing that we've sort of learned from previous implementations, shall we say, is having the right resources, the right project management that knows what they're talking about, and the amount of resources basically to do these upgrades. You might well think it's relatively straightforward, but this project has taken, best part of 12 months to actually move it into the cloud, basically. There are quite a number of benefits, as Neil's sort of highlighted some of them. But yeah, they do take a long time, and we need to get it right as well.
Thank you very much. No more questions. Well, we look forward to hearing how you migrate. So thanks ever so much, Neil. You're welcome to stay if you want to see the exciting meeting. Thanks. Next one on maintenance and refurbishment. Yasmin.
Thanks, Chair. So this was a moderate on design and a moderate on effectiveness. The purpose of this review, so we looked at the controls and arrangements the council has in place to oversee and manage planned maintenance and refurbishment works for the council-owned properties. In terms of some of the good practice, and just to add a bit of context as well, the council have a 25-year SLA agreement with ODS since 2018. The SLA identified the details of the work to be undertaken and also looked at the critical success factors in place as well, signed by both parties and kind of agreed. However, we have picked up that the council can benefit from reviewing their terms within the SLA, especially when there's changes of businesses or any sort of kind of areas of changes to focus on. And since 2018, there hasn't been any revisions made to that SLA. So something that needs to be looked at in that area. In terms of the findings, again, I'll concentrate on the medium priority findings. Acuity was an outsourced provider. It was commissioned by the council in October to November 2022 to survey, to send out surveys to tenants, collecting data on their opinions and attitudes towards their landlord and the services provided. Feedback was obtained from the survey. It was reviewed by the immediate team, but we couldn't evidence whether any sort of themes were pulled out from the feedback, whether there was any sort of kind of action track or action plans in place, and lessons learned weren't circulated to other departments as well. So something that the council can benefit from, and we've made a recommendation in that area. Finding 2 around delegated budgets. So there's a budget tracker in place, a spreadsheet. All of the kind of information that was supplied to that spreadsheet was from the previous housing management system called Codeman. And then it was uploaded into QL. What we found was that the data that was within Codeman was inaccurate because none of the data was validated. So they were working with historic data or kind of clone data. And we have recommended that is looked at and validated before the budget setting process continues on that area. The spreadsheet detailed 2,892 council properties that required refurbishment from 23-24. Management have confirmed that the information reported within the spreadsheet was historic data, and now 100% stock condition survey is being done to validate the condition of every property, and then those accurate data will be uploaded within that spreadsheet. In terms of finding three, we selected a sample of 9 planned refurbishment projects that were completed across 2 areas. So there was a housing revenue account and also general fund properties. And there were numerous exceptions within the data that was recorded. I'll just pull that up, sorry. So I get. Just to note on some of the exceptions that were noted within that sample testing. So there wasn't any evidence available on the project start date for 1 out of the 9 projects reviewed. So we couldn't determine whether the project was completed in a timely manner and whether it was started in line with a planned start date. We provided all of the sample kind of numbers for the individuals to go back and look at as well. We couldn't validate the planned completion date for 5 projects as there was no evidence available on the projects at the time of the review. Again, we couldn't determine whether there were any sort of delays between the planned and actual completion dates on those areas. We received the actual cost for 8 of the 9 projects reviewed and noted that for 3 projects, the variances there were quite a few variances. So if I just touch on one, planned cost reported was 285k, the actual cost reported was 324, giving you a variance of 39k. But there weren't any reasons or any sort of narratives reported on what was the cause of the unfavourable variance on that one. And there were a few more others in that sample as well. One I do want to touch on was around evidence of independent quality assessment that is undertaken for all projects that are completed. So we couldn't evidence whether a quality assessment was undertaken for 5 completed projects because there just wasn't any data available for us to have a look at in that area. So we're not sure whether the quality control, whether the completion of works was of quality before it was signed off. I'll stop there for any questions. I can go on in terms of the sample testing.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, that's quite a list. Neither Malcolm nor Neris are here, so Nigel again's put up his hand, so he's going to respond.
Yeah, I'm having chatted through with Neris basically about some of the findings. Actually, she's given me some bullet points. I think in terms of the complaint, I think there's a theme here actually, but in terms of complaints, it's a question of having resources to actually deal with in an efficient manner, basically, the numbers of complaints generally. And she advises that a new complaints officer will start from the 22nd of January, basically. So hopefully we will improve our efficiency in regard to that. In terms of the budget setting question raised by internal audit, it is recognised that the condition survey for housing is incomplete. A new survey has been commissioned, and that is now underway, basically. That's around a 2-year rolling programme, but certainly that is a deficiency in the amount of data that we've got. So we had to rely on the information from Codeman, which has pointed out is historic data. In terms of the sort of checking off and signing off of jobs, I think for me it stems back to when we set the contract up, and I think it was a general view that we wanted a more softer client in, basically. And I think we went off on that basis way back, say back in 2018 sort of thing. And perhaps, there is I think of late, basically, there's a recognition, certainly by officers, there's a need to do more clienting, basically. We've had an external review sort of thing to look at a lot of areas around our clienting. And that includes the contract that Yasmin mentioned and a review of the contracts and the specification that we made at the time for all of the services provided by ODS. And we are indeed in the middle of basically of that review as we speak. So I think there's a lot more, and it's not just around planned maintenance. This is around all the technical services like waste and streets and parks, etc. So that is an ongoing process. And that will be reported in due course, actually. But recognition of all those issues that have been raised, and hopefully giving some overlay from Neris basically as to what we are doing about them. But happy to certainly take questions and probably feedback to Neris if I can't answer them.
Questions from committee members? No, I mean, this is a comment. Sorry.
Sorry, mine's a comment as well. It might be something actually for the scrutiny committee to perhaps put on their workload actually to have a closer look at this. In fact, actually.
Well, I was going to raise yet another, in fact, panel, but the budget panel. If you look at our budget, reduction in charges by ODS is an important element going forward, and clearly that is related very much to the SLAs. And the work that Nigel mentioned is now being undertaken. And clearly we all, I think, recognise it's a priority, because the last thing we want is a zero-sum game where we try and force down the charges to us, but it merely reduces the dividend that we get. That's not a very good outcome. But no, it sounded... Could I make one very pedantic point? There's the word onboarding. I can't remember where the hell it came from. I don't even know what an onboarding is, but I've written it here with an exclamation mark. Can we change it to something intelligible? Do you know what onboarding is? Yeah. What? Well, that's the context. I think it's about over-underestimates, but anyhow, it appears there. You can find it. I never have onboarded anyone.
Resources are being onboarded.
I think that's perfectly fine.
Yeah. Is it allowed in Scrabble? Yeah. I hope not. Any other questions? No, thanks very much. I think now we come on to the important area. You look at completed and incomplete recommendations. They are very important for us. Would you like to introduce those, please?
Yep, I'll keep this one brief, Chair. So there's 24 recommendations that were due for this audit committee. In terms of the 21-22, there was 1 high and 6 medium recommendations that were completed since the last committee and have been marked as complete and removed from the tracker. 1 high and 3 medium recommendations remain incomplete for environment. Of these, 1 medium recommendation was discussed with Nigel, and we're going to look to reflect any sort of changes in practice on that. There's more details within the report section. And then 1 medium recommendation for business continuity and disaster recovery is currently on its 2nd revised due date, and will continue to be followed up in terms of our follow-up process. In terms of the 22-23 recommendations, 3 medium recommendations have been completed since the last committee. 1 medium recommendation for change programme has been downgraded to a low and no longer will be followed up. And 2 high and 6 medium recommendations remain incomplete, and they'll be continue to be followed up as part of our process. And these were around housing rents, enforcement restructure, procurement and contract management, and cybersecurity as well. I just wanted to point out in terms of the kind of the progress of a follow-up in general. 12 recommendations were reported at the September audit committee, and of those 7 recommendations were implemented. So we had a 58% completion rate. In comparison, 24 recommendations for this time round, 11 recommendations were implemented, and so a 46% completion rate. So overall, the council have performed worse than that they did in the last committee, resulting in a 21% decline. And it's just a nudge, I guess, to ensure that we are implementing recommendations when they are falling due. We do try our best to ensure the implementation dates are as realistic as possible, to ensure that we can complete them at least at the date that they were agreed for. So yeah, just a comment from myself. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the polite way of nudging. I think maybe it can be minuted and Nigel can do a bit of nudging on completed. Could I just ask, before we invite questions. We've got Tina, who's been very patiently listening in to the rest of the agenda. Would you like to respond in particular on the environment comments about the incomplete, which, and I just made a note here, about one appears to require, from what you said in the papers, quite a lot of work. Would you like to comment on those queries?
I think the one that requires work that's sort of under my or under our remit, because I'm sort of standing here for Mish as well, is the one where we need to look at sort of how we monitor and report on finance in relation to net zero. And I've got a meeting set up with our finance business partner, Barbara, at the end of this month, beginning of next month, to see how we can look at that. So that's the one that's that I've got on my radar to look at and see what we can do about.
Any comments on the other incomplete related to environment? There were others.
I think that there's the one about the sort of mapping of council land. And again, some of these rely on other partners in the organisation, or this kind of teamwork that's needed to be done. So if the medium-term financial plan all goes through, there should be another member of staff joining the corporate property team, and that will enable us to have a bit more resource to look at what we can do on that one. That's 6.2. We're looking at that. And then there's ones where about the sort of different strategies and action plans across the council, and the kind of reporting and alignment with net zero and the carbon management plan. And in general, I think nowadays most of those will align, because under all of our procurement and all of our committee reports and other elements, there's a remit now to sort of include environmental concerns. I think when some of this was done, that wasn't so ingrained in the system. So going forward, we should pick those up. But there's also an action on myself and Vicky, who have fairly recently started our roles to go through and talk to corporate property about some of the outliers on that. So I think going forward, that will naturally be picked up anyway. Does that help?
Thank you very much. I'm going to invite first committee members on that before going on to the other incomplete recommendations. Are there some questions for Tina? Anna.
I'll just make a comment that there's lots of completed environment ones as well. So, they have been doing stuff. It's fine.
There we are. There is praise as well as incomplete. Thank you. Could I make one general comment about some of the others that appear as incomplete? There are, I think I don't have the actual papers in front of me, but I think there are quite a few where there seems to be a difference of opinion between the officers and you about whether they are complete. And this sounds as if there's something wrong in the process. What is the procedure to make sure that if people tell you it's complete, that somehow this is done in a satisfactory manner that pleases you?
Thanks, Chair. So 6 weeks before the follow-up report is due to the Audit Committee, we will start sending out reminders and request for a response against the recommendation, and then also supporting evidence as well. So we won't just take the officer's word for it. We do rely on evidence. And if the evidence isn't available, we're not prepared to sign off the recommendations. If that's the case. So you will find in one of the next reports for cyber as well, there are some recommendations where management do believe that they are complete, but unless evidence isn't provided, internal audit aren't willing to sign things off, I'm afraid. So that's where the differing of opinions may occur.
Just quickly to follow up on that then, is it that evidence is not being provided, or that the evidence, or that you deem the evidence to be insufficient? Because I guess those are two different things. Yeah.
It would be your first point. Evidence is not being provided, rather than us believing it's insufficient, because we're happy to work with officers where needed to see the evidence that is available and either be satisfied with it or request for further evidence if needed. But it's your first point.
So I guess then the question is to officers, and I'm not sure who, looking at Nigel probably, as to what's happening there where evidence isn't being provided about claims about about them being implemented.
Could I jump in? We've got Emma very patiently sitting there representing law and governance. I wonder, is this a role for them or is it for you, Nigel? I'll ask Emma first.
I mean, Nigel might disagree with me, Chair, but I don't think it's for legal.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't disagree with Emma on this occasion. Yeah, there is probably a role here actually, and I'd like to think it was a question of timing. I think to be fair, it's probably partly evidence that is provided, but it's not to the satisfaction of the auditors, and it's the auditor that signs it off or not, as the case may be. So it's probably a bit of one and another sort of thing. It's a question of timing in some instances where we need to get reports back to this committee, and we're not quite there through officers being absent or whatever sort of thing. But I suspect there's a little bit about, well, I've given you some evidence yet, but you haven't given me what I'm looking for, which is X basically. And if you want me to sign this off, that's what I'm looking for. That is for the auditor to decide, and that's their judgment basically. So I suspect it's a bit of that latter, but I'd like to think it's timing as well, actually. So yeah, and if I need to sort of stir the pot basically in terms of heads of service, then I can do that sort of thing. Yeah.
I was just going to add, Chair, if that's okay, to say and to take a little bit away from Nigel and actually place it on BDO as well in terms of self-reflecting, in terms of timing, is that sometimes in the process you ask for evidence. It's not always reasonable to expect that evidence is immediately going to tick whatever it is that we require. We may naturally have questions. So I think from a BDO perspective, the reflection I have, and I'll liaise with Yasmin on this and then Nigel as well, is allowing more time in the process, that more often than not, there may actually be a second question you need to have once you've received the initial evidence. Otherwise, we just come back to the committee as we have today to say we haven't received sufficient evidence, which I'm sure frustrates committee members to say, well, we haven't got an outcome here. I think if we allow that more time in the process, that we can have 2 or 3 times of asking a question, which may sometimes be needed. It means we can come with a fuller picture to this committee if we bring some of those timelines forward. So that's something I'll take away as well, to make sure that the process and what you receive here is more complete.
Okay, Ros.
Although having said that, I mean, some things might be time critical, particularly if they're high priority to get right.
Yeah. I mean, but can we take it that by the time we meet next, there will have been a discussion about it and trying to make sure that service areas don't appear to be blamed when maybe they feel it was not enough time, or this iteration that you described wasn't possible to be complete? I mean, if you need to adjust the time in advance, so be it, but it'd be nice to know that there are fewer incomplete for this reason. Other reasons, yes, but this is a difference of opinion, clearly.
Yeah, we'll make sure that's done.
Thanks very much. Any other questions? I had one on procurement, and it seems very important, and this comes up in particular again. I mentioned the leisure contract, a big new contract to be signed quite soon. A procedure to monitor KPIs. We are actually appointing an extra officer to oversee the leisure contract, and that it's implemented properly. But that cannot be stressed enough, I think, in that context, procurement and monitoring KPIs. But I don't know, is that again ultimately your province, Nigel?
Yeah, unfortunately, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think to a certain extent is one of capacity. I mean, we do try to put a sample of KPIs basically in different contracts, and they tend to be more generic sort of thing, that you should be looking at timeliness and quality and stuff like that. We leave it to the contract managers to manage the contract, which I think is wholly appropriate. I don't think I've got enough resources to sort of keep an eye on that, but I think as an organisation, we possibly need to get better at contract management. And you allude to leisure contracts, and perhaps that's a case in point. But yeah, I think that's the point basically where we need to get better. If we set KPIs out, we need to make sure they're monitored and you receive the performance that you're expecting in accordance with the contract. So I think work in progress. I don't think it entirely rests on the procurement manager, but more with contract managers who are throughout the organisation. But again, one for me to perhaps table against the heads of service and other managers to say we need to do better.
Thank you. Lots
I
of
was just going to add, Chair, very briefly, and it'll probably come in a future sector update that we provide, and I'm sure Nigel's aware, there are, and members maybe as well, there is a new Procurement Act 2023 in legislation, and this will have a significant impact on organisations like Oxford and other public sector organisations. Operationally, this kicks in from about October onwards, where there's quite a number of changes which are still being detailed and ironed out in terms of how that will impact, but it will have stronger focus on the powers that organisations have around managing underperforming suppliers, KPIs, more transparency on procurement as well in general. So it's not directly linked necessarily to follow up, but just to make members aware, there is quite a big legislative change in the area of procurement coming up and will impact the authority in an area, no doubt, that we will obviously look at in the near future as well.
Actually, for the benefit of this committee, would it be possible for the next meeting to have a note about how you understand the impact of the change to be? Would that sounds rather far-reaching, Nigel?
Yeah, we can say, I'd certainly welcome any input from BDO, but also I'm aware that it's on the work programme for Annette Osborne, who is the procurement manager. So we can bring a report here, and certainly I'll get Annette to speak to Yasmin and complete about their input as well.
Thank you very much. Thanks for pointing that out. Are there more questions for Yasmin, for Gurpreet? If not, I'd like to say, as a reader, I always enjoy your reports. And I like your summary of the tidbits from the news items and so on. I think other councillors besides those on the committee ought to look at them. Actually, it's very salutary, and thanks very much. It is appreciated, and it's nice, just like actually with Ryan, to see people. Both of you have risen through the ranks over the last few years, very justifiably. Congratulations. Thanks very much. Now we are going to go. We haven't given you up totally because we're coming now, but I think we have to go almost certainly into confidential session, and we've got Rocco on the call.
Could I make a suggestion that perhaps we take the minutes, the unrestricted item, at the far end before we then go into restricted? Would that be all right? Because there are several outstanding actions that haven't happened that we need to note, please.
No, that's a good point. Okay, let's change the order, go to agenda item 11 and minutes of the last meeting. Would you like to raise your points, please?
Yes, it's just the actions. Sorry, Chair, it's just the actions there that we have under 19 that we were going to have the head of planning here to the next committee. As you know, we had to cancel the last meeting, which I thought was a great shame because I was looking forward to hearing from the head of planning. We didn't have that. And we haven't had the thing on section 106 monies. So there's those two there. And also that we would have a note from Gurpreet Dule on the clarification of finding, and that would be reported to the next meeting. So can we please not lose those actions and definitely see them at the next meeting, please, Chair, because it's very disappointing to me, actually, as I think probably very dedicated committee member, not to have had the meeting in late autumn. As you know, I did raise it with you. And to not see those to date either. So I'm happy to accept the minutes and to say thank you to the committee clerk for them too.
Thank you very much. And Nigel will respond.
I'll respond on the Dave Butler one actually, because he did speak to, I think, Law and Governance actually and say due to capacity issues, it wasn't possible for this meeting, but it is still on the agenda and Lucy's clocked that basically. So David will come to the next meeting and pick up these actions and any other actions, basically, perhaps around empty property and stuff like that as well. I'll leave Gurpreet to answer for the other action, actually.
Yeah, so immediately after the previous committee, I did send a note to my team to see if they could answer the question around duty to cooperate. I copied Nigel in on that email at the end of September, early October, sorry, just for information to show that we were acting upon that action. My colleague has responded to me on that. I don't have the email directly in front of me. Yasmin may do if she's able to provide a response in committee. If not, we have got a response to that, which I could share immediately after this meeting to committee. So we did. So I can assure you verbally, we did follow this up and receive the answer to that. I just can't give you the answer right now because I'd need to dig out the email and then have a read of it and send that over.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. So that's been noted by Lucy, I'm sure, for the next meeting of this committee. And the next, while we're jumping ahead, the next meeting is on the 8th of April, so it's in less than 3 months. Thanks very much. So now I'm going to suggest we do go into confidential session. And I think you all have it in front of you, but I have to read out this.
Yes, just have to read it.
We first have to vote on going into confidential session. So this item, this is agenda item 10, internal audit follow-up report on cyber security. This item includes exempt information pursuant to paragraph 7 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. If the committee wishes to discuss matters relating to the information set out in the attached report to this item, it's necessary for the committee to pass a resolution to exclude the press and public from the meeting, as set out in agenda item 9. So can I please see from committee members' approval? It's approved unanimously, so thank you.
Kristen says her hand up. Would you like to make a comment before we move?
I just wanted to double check, Lucy, that you were going to stop the live streaming.